action.
All right, so I wasn't in the class today. I was doing the stations. Can you guys tell me a little bit of how the lesson went and what you guys did?
Well, my biggest takeaway from it is just how meaningful having the kids talk to each other is, and how as teachers we think we need to like bring them back in and evaluate everything with them, but they learn so much from each other.
Right.
Did you guys have them partner up and have the same board? I know yesterday you talked about sharing a whiteboard. Did you do that?
We did it differently today, and we did our normal morning going over the morning work routine, and then we had 2 separate papers for them to share, but they got one paper. One just had simple math equations on them, and then the other one was a word problem.
Yeah, just wanted to see the difference between how they communicated with like computation and finding patterns there versus applying it to a word problem.
And what did you guys find?
You have less communication, I feel like, with the computation problems than you do
Sure.
the word problem, obviously. But
I even saw some kids, because there were either 8 or 10 on there, literally divide them in half and have like one person do the top ones and another person do the other ones, so they weren't even really collaborating at all.
right, and that was a big thing for them. We said, if I get it right, then you get it right. And if you get it wrong, I get it wrong. But when they divided it, that accountability went away. So,
Was there anything that really stuck out that a student said about their collaborating strategies?
I feel like in general I just saw certain kids shine that you don't often see shine in that large group of raising your hands, and maybe because they're not raising their hands, or maybe because they're not always called on, you don't hear their ideas. Because we had kids at the end present, a few of them present their strategies, and there were 2 that I was like really blown away by, that I would have never been like, oh, they really know what they're doing all the time. So that was really telling.
I'm curious on who that is. We'll talk about that later.
Did you guys have to give them sentence starters, or were there any behaviors with having to work with a partner?
No,
Anything
I mean, they
surprising?
work together so much, so no, that wasn't a big deal. That I don't feel.
There was maybe like one kid that I had to redirect numerous times, but we always have to redirect that one child, so it wasn't surprising. But I do think that when I had tried something similar the day before, I had a lot of kids that were not okay with it, and they, now that they've done it a little bit, they
okay
were
with
better.
sharing one material.
Yeah.
But they have done that before, not with the whiteboard.
Right.
So that's why that was probably a challenge. But working on a word problem, they have done
True.
in pairs before.
Was there any explicit instruction you had to give about how to talk with a partner?
Only because there was a few changes. So they had to, we introduced criteria. If you do this, you get a star. If you were able to accomplish this, the first paper had 2, the third one had 3. I mean, the second one had 3, and some of them marked off that they had done all 3, and they really had not. So we're gonna
Teach that.
yeah, we'll come back to that on Monday with them, just so they can evaluate that and evaluate themselves. So doing that self-checking, self-monitoring,
Yeah.
which is something we need to increase. We'll talk about that this
I
afternoon.
think it's small, but it sort of goes into that, and Sarah was doing a lot of it. I liked how she gave directions and then had them turn to a partner and had them tell their partner what the expectation was. Because I feel like I often just like spew things at them and then I just
They can own it for
expect them to
themselves.
know what to go and do. And
Well, you might call them one person
Right.
to restate it or summarize it as a whole. We all do that.
Yeah.
But here, if you're walking around and monitoring, you can hear if they truly understand with each other.
And if there are kids, you know, that weren't listening or don't know, hopefully their partner can say it, or they can listen in on another partnership that knew what to do. So I thought that was a really great teaching.
Right, but when they were sharing on the carpet about the directions, that those were not the same groups that ended up together in
True.
the end.
So it sounds like everyone was very engaged
Yes,
by
absolutely.
being able to share the materials and talk.
Yep, and sharing your strategies. One of the takeaways is you realize that some of those tricks that they learn, they can't explain. So they
Yeah,
don't
talk
actually
about
understand the math behind it.
Mathematically, what did you notice with each of the tasks? So talk about the patterns task that they did. What did you guys notice mathematically? What were surprises for you for the kids?
For the first one,
Yeah.
so it was like multiples of 10, and a lot of them knew the trick, take the 0 off and add it back, but they could not, almost none of them could articulate it. There were a few kids I could tell they did know, but how to verbalize that, and so that's something to think about from our end, like how can we improve that understanding,
Just
because
the
it's very
numbers
abstract.
too. Yeah.
And
the number
explaining
sense.
that number sense.
Yeah. So that was a huge one where, you think they have it because they're getting the right answers, but they don't actually have the math understanding, and that's scary because one of my big things about tens and everything is that's what they have to apply to fractions and decimals next year. So if they don't understand it here, they're going to struggle next year, which made me have a personal connection with my own child who has math sense, but I'm wondering if that break happened with him too.
And I think a lot of times tasks like that, people look at and go, oh, that's not a rigorous task, right? Because
You have to understand
it's
the
just
numbers.
equations, right? So the kids can get the right answer. But when you dig into the having to explain why that's working, then that lifts the rigor back up.
Right.
So, but
Something I
like,
felt like we were accomplishing, I realized we hadn't.
oh wait, we got to go back and really think about the why. And what you were talking about, I think it was you, that they were dividing the paper in half, and then they weren't even working together.
Yeah.
So that opportunity for that math talk disappears
Right.
if they can just, pound it out, but not have a structure to do the explaining.
Because I feel like sometimes teachers will think, the equations, 10 of them is better because they're doing more problems, so it's more practice, as opposed to the one word problem where they're only really practicing one multiplication fact. But there was so much more math discussion and modeling going on in that one problem than just the 8 problems or 10 problems.
Do you think though you would, because like a wonder for me is, I wonder if we'd only done the word problem if we would have unearthed that lack of ability to explain. So to me, the
So there's
first one,
important in both,
Yeah.
of course.
yeah. So I think it's important for people to see all kinds are important. It's just for what purpose. Am I
Right.
picking the right task for the right purpose? And then from that, what am I gleaning from it that's going to help me shift
And
instruction?
the 8 problems, they didn't have to do all 8. They were given the choice of
Did you see
4
any that
or more.
only did 4 though? Most of the kids I saw.
Almost all of them, they did them quickly because they can.
Mm-hmm.
It was when you made them go back and discuss it. But
And
I had a few groups that were struggling with it, and I had to eventually just say, okay, we're
You've
done.
done enough. Yep, let's go and try the other one.
There were definitely one in each group, each rotation.
One piece that we shifted for the second lesson was that the kids were self-checking. I know we had one that said,
second
I just
rotation.
wrote the correct answer after. So that's something to think about, like, circle the ones if you missed it, but it's okay. We're going to move on.
She explained it.
But
and
she
they owned up to
explained it.
right
Yeah,
away.
it was really cute, very honest. But how do you feel like just that management technique could shift, empowering you guys to be less held to management to more facilitation? Because I feel like that
I think
shifted.
they do some checking in the stations.
So yeah,
don't
we
they?
could have it uniform so they're used to it, but anytime in stations when they're working with partners or if they're doing the around the room, they can work with partners as well. They go and check it and they get excited to circle the ones that get wrong because they get to come to the back table and
Okay.
go over it with them. So they turn it in all the time with circles.
So that's a
around.
routine for you guys.
out there.
That's awesome. That is
Not
And then I
really.
say, go back and try it again. If it's still wrong, circle it, put it in the turn and try, and then I poll those kids the next day and we go over the questions together.
Okay. And then for the story problem, what were your ahas with that one? Like, what emerged for you from what you were able to observe and see?
I
versus
realized
what you might
that
have
even
expected.
though we're constantly encouraging them to model the problem exactly, because I think that goes back to understanding where a missing number might be, like unknown numbers, and if you have to figure out what does that mean, am I missing the whole, the part, or whatever, the divisor, the quotient. A lot of them were able to model it holistically, but did not grasp the real world part. Only one group out of all the
Yeah, I
groups.
only had one student clarify what an aisle was. And so she then immediately was like, I need to divide, or I think she said make a space in between. But no other students like asked what that was or obviously showed it in their modeling. I felt like a lot of the groups were great about picking out the numbers and creating an equation and solving for it, but the modeling was a little interesting to me because I do feel like we are constantly like we have to model even if you know what the numbers are. And
I'm always modeling that. I did that just in the morning work yesterday or the day before, and so it's interesting to see what they pick up on,
what
or
they
don't
own independently.
Actually,
And if they can get those real world
what they'll do
connections,
for
it's gonna
you
make it
because they know
more
you're going to
meaningful.
check versus what they'll do for themselves to actually understand the material. Even.
So this was an example in, we're all really thinking about quality core instruction. Today was an example of productive group work. And so I still think there's room for them to continue to work in that productive group work. We saw things like they worked amazing together, but labeling, making sense of the context, tying and being able to explain how your model shows what the story's telling and those kind of things. What are some ways you think you're going to be able to build that productive group work in for them going forward, maybe with your morning routines or that, before then you have them do the independent practice? Because what I see a lot right now, honestly, is that their morning work is independent practice.
yeah.
So how might you fold some of those ideas in terms of upping the math talk and the engagement and stuff? What are some ideas you guys have for that?
We could put a sheet of morning work instead of them all doing it in their journal. They would have to work on one task together.
Possibility.
I mean, we do choose morning work based off of things that we're seeing maybe are lacking in whole group instruction. So it is data driven, but I do think that it would be great maybe instead of checking together, like it is still independent, but then, instead of us
Maybe
kind of
using some of
modeling
that
to them,
criteria.
they come back together and check each other's work. Because as I was explaining to them yesterday, and I think we kind of got at with these groups, it really helps them to see other people's strategies and understand how it can be done in a different way.
And to actually see it from each
If
other.
they're their own teacher or they're teaching other kids, they're going to have a lasting impact of that.
I think we just continue on because we've done the groups before, not with the criteria, so that was a change. We have given them one paper before.
Right.
We haven't always, I'm gonna sneeze.
Gazoon tight.
It's right there.
Cucumber.
My eyes gonna water.
Don't cry. It's good.
No, I think we should just continue and grow from where we are because today they are able to work in groups because they have worked in groups. We've built that.
The routines are so there.
Right. And one of the things in Caring Schools that we have been working on in particular is how to communicate with each other. And those did have sentence starters. But we didn't do that today because that's something that has been...
They own it now.
Yeah, we've been trying to practice that. They're pretty patient with each other. I think the biggest difference too right now with our current one is in the past we have let them select their own groups. So it's always been self-selected unless we made a change on our own because we're like, yeah, that's not going to work. Instead of being deliberate with the levels that you suggested. So that's a change. That's a little more of a challenge with our second rotation due to the levels in that room. So
I'm just interested in if we continue this, do we just continue to have them meet with that same partner always? Like how often would we change that up? You know what I mean? Like we obviously want them to feel comfortable with who they're working with.
I used to have, I don't think there's a right answer to that. Just for my sanity, the most frequently I changed it was by a week.
I think we could do exit tickets or the check-ins that we use, and if something needs to change, then we switch that on there based on that data.
Because
some
normally we
days you
don't
may
always
still
print
want
out
them.
the paper for them. They work in groups and it's just on the whiteboard. We've annotated together. So a takeaway would be they do need the paper more often because we noticed they weren't annotating.
I was struck by that because of how hard you guys work with them on annotating.
So that was a huge takeaway for me today because...
But was that a hang up for them to then solve? Like that for me, I don't know that you guys are going to have to study that a little bit with their work samples because for me, I've seen you guys now model annotating twice, and it's clearly a routine. The kids know what they're doing, they're following along, etc. But then when you see them do it on their own, do they own it? That for me is what today was really about.
Well, the
Can you
group
read
that
the
understood
problem?
that problem the most
Annotated
it.
exactly. And that was a one-step problem.
Yes.
So, segueing into when do we do the two-step, and when do we do the multi-step, and when do we do a two-part, and like different kinds of problems, and that will be really interesting to study.
Problem today had a lot more words than we typically give them.
Yep.
Bigger words too.
Yep.
Yeah, vocabulary.
And in the stations, at the M station today, they had 4 word problems. They had the choice to either work as a group, they could all have it in their journal, or they could do one per partner. And it was just a one-step problem. And when they came to check it with me, they had to have it annotated. And I would just ask them. I noticed that a lot of the kids, some will circle the numbers, some will bubble, and some will underline. But they could all tell me why they did that.
I wonder too, if you guys wanted to continue and do another lesson study, like try something else, differentiating the problems and seeing what they would self-select in terms of level. So if we leveled some problems and said, we're going to preview 3 problems today, you and your partner are going to pick the one that's just right for you, and see what they're able to do. That might be a next step.
Well, we have talked about a next step with our team in our team meetings too, and I had tasked myself with this and haven't done it, but like numberless problems, and not like the ones that are on Schoology where it's just one line after another. Truly a word problem with no numbers in it, and then you could differentiate from 1 digit, 2 digit to 3 digit.
I've done
Also,
number banks with that, where the kids can pick the number, like here's a whole bunch of numbers, here's your problem, put the numbers in that make sense to you, and do that. I even did that with the 5th grade last year.
What I noticed
Well,
this
we were
week,
trying to
I mean,
think
there's a
about
lot of
way
neat
to
ways.
give them those different, more complex word problems, but then maybe with some students that are
Need the smaller numbers and some that
Yes.
need the bigger numbers.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I haven't done that, but that's something that is definitely a next step for our group as a whole.
So there's a couple then that I'm going to write down that we could maybe try a numberless problem, with either the kids writing their own numbers. The challenge I see sometimes when kids write their own numbers is, and your little guy that did it this morning with powers would write, 8,972,000
Yes, and he
times
would.
7. So maybe giving them some choice would be good. So maybe that.
And that little guy is only 7 years.
It's amazing. And then maybe try the choice where they have some choice. Because I think in your centers time, I'll come and look at centers next. Like I'll come and do that. But giving a big thing that I'm seeing is how do you differentiate your centers and give kids some agency in what they're choosing.
so like each center, besides the technology, is differentiated. The technology, they have choices, but it is differentiated if they're going on Prodigy, is at their level and things
sure.
like that.
Sure.
But the ones that are in the
Like
buckets
choice.
right now, the around the room, sometimes to differentiate, I'll just cut the paper in half. Sometimes they're labeled by colors, so red, orange, and yellow, and they're low, medium, high, and the kids they know their color. But
Do they ever get to pick?
Yeah, this week I just said I have this choice and I have this choice, and you can pick whatever one you want.
Nice.
So they, especially for some of our behaviors, it really helps because I was surprised. Some of the kids that I thought would take the half sheet took the full sheet,
Kids like to be
and
challenged.
so
It was like you saw they finished all
Yeah.
of them instead of 4.
Yeah.
We were concerned because we don't give just computation problems to them ever. We always work within a word problem, and so.
You were curious to see.
Well, at first I was like, ooh, that might be jarring to them, but they all did. They weren't even surprised when you showed it to them. They were like, oh.
They were like, oh, what's going on with that? They were very comfortable being uncomfortable today.
Yeah.
Which really speaks to the culture in your classrooms. Okay, so your one takeaway. I know we have 2 lesson studies then we want to think about. What's your one takeaway that you're going to try and implement with immediacy?
The criteria part for me.
I think that's a really good one. I just think the concept in general of having them work more together in an area away from the carpet, I think it's much more meaningful than just turn to your partner and then quickly come back. Like, I just think a lot of kids that don't always grasped the concept probably had a much more meaningful time in math today than they might typically have.
Okay.
And I heard a lot of you guys talking about the students talking, and I had a principal once tell me that in your classroom, I should hear the kids 95% of the time, and you 5%.
Right.
So that's my biggest takeaway, not even being in the classroom, is they should be able to come in the classroom and not hear me and be able to ask
Who's
the kids
doing the
what they're
talking,
doing.
who's doing the learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, you should be facilitating.
Nice. Well, thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Yeah.